Okay, the demo will be in real time, and it was the making of this bat that you see here. And I've made several of these bats in different sizes and that. The one thing I want to warn you about in the demo is that at the time I filmed it, um, COVID had set in, and I didn't have access to a piece of good dry hardwood. So what I ended up having to do was use some green softer maple, and you'll see where I encountered some problems with the turning. If you turn it out of a nice piece of dry hardwood, you won't have those problems, I can assure you. We debated on whether to refilm it using a piece of dry wood, and then finally we decided no, leave it, so that if you do try it with some green wood, you'll know what to expect, okay? If during the demo, if you have any questions, feel free to unmic yourself and ask the questions. I'll stop the demo and answer them, okay? Okay, so share screen. Hi, I'm Ruby, and welcome to the demo today. I wish I could see you all in person, but that's not going to happen for a little bit, I'm afraid. What we're going to do today is something a little more difficult than usual, geared more towards an intermediate or an advanced turner. We're going to make this bat, and it managed to catch a fastball halfway through it. So this is what is called an off-center turning, and it's a spindle spindle turning. So we're going to follow the rules for spindle turning. Basically, this ball is just a bead, so you turn from the top to the lower parts, and the same thing going downhill on the bat. Now, if you're a total beginner, I'd say don't try this. Try making just the bat by itself, and try making a sphere for the ball. And once you feel comfortable doing those, then you'll know the process, you could go ahead and try something like this. Now, before you approach this project, you want to give it a little bit of thought. And what I do, lay it out first on paper to determine what size I want to make it. Now, you see these red lines that are on here. This one goes through the center of the sphere, and this one goes through the center of the bat. Both of them meet at the bottom of the bat. And so we're only using the two centers over here for turning the two parts. Okay? Now, I don't usually do this, but I laid it out in magic marker on the wood. And that's mostly so it would be visible to you. The red lines indicate where our centers are, and you can see here where I've marked the center. I've come at right angles down on the wood and found the center of the piece. And on this end, here's the center for the bat, and here's the center for the ball. Now, by doing this, you can also calculate what size piece of wood you want. You'll be able to tell the length of the wood by adding maybe 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch on each end of the bat. And I know the widest part of the bat coming out to the widest part in this case is about 2 3/4 inches, so I gave myself an extra inch, okay, just for the purposes of turning. Now the thickest part of this is the bat itself at 2 inches, so I only needed this much wood here, and I gave myself a little bit of wiggle room on there as well. So just because this end is this wide doesn't mean it has to be that thick. So that'll help you with finding a piece of wood and conserving what wood you have. Okay, we're going to mount this in the lathe. I've put in a drive center and a live center here, and I'm going to put the center for the bottom of the bat here, and I'm going to bring this up to where the center of the bat is here again. Because what I want to do is just waste a little bit of wood first to get this roughed out. Okay? Okay, so you bring up the tool rest, lock everything down. Before you even think about turning on the lathe, you spin it by hand to make sure that nothing's going to hit. Okay, I turn the speed of the lathe right down, make sure it's in forward. Put your face shield on, and I'm going to use my Sorby spindle roughing gouge. So I turn the lathe on. I turn it up until I've got some vibration happening, then I back off the speed a little bit. Okay, the tool I'm using is the Sorby roughing gouge. This is never, ever, ever used on a bowl. I rest the tool on the tool rest. Notice that the handle is down low near where my pocket would be. I bring it in and begin my cut. Get up close to where the ball is, so you can use your beading parting tool for this. Keep the handle down low, anchor it on the tool rest, bring it into the cut, wiggle it to give yourself a little swing. Now, if you don't own a beading parting tool, but you do own one of these square scrapers, such as Greg Killian makes, okay, one of these square scrapers, you can use this. Now, the one thing I want to warn you about is that when you get to this end, you don't want to go past this line. Otherwise, we may take out where the center for this, for the spear is. So what you want to do is make sure you leave about an inch up here, because we don't want to take out where our center point for our spear is. Otherwise, we're going to have trouble turning that part. Alright, so it's all clear. Okay, so we've got kind of a wild pattern going on here. Okay, these fuzzy parts are starting to bother me, so I'm just going to clean them up a little bit using my bowl gouge, and I'm just going to come in I'm going to do is I'm going to change centers to the center for the sphere. I let it come down. You don't change the tail center at all. It stays exactly the way it was. Okay, having moved that, you notice how it's just hitting the tool rest. So you have to make sure you move the tool rest so that it's out of the way. Always spin it first before you commence. Okay. Now on this thing across here, now all I want to do is come down to where the center of the sphere is. And I think I stop and check. Okay. You can see where already we've come in on to where the bat is. And I'm just touching the top of the sphere here, so now I need to make it round. So I'll go a little further. Okay, we're almost at round. Okay, now I can come in a little more on each side. I'm still a little bit off here on being round, so I'll come in a little bit further. Okay, we now have a diameter for our ball. Okay, this is where we have to be careful because we have to come in now and start making these cuts. It's better if your sphere, your ball is actually narrower than a full sphere. So what I want to do is with pencil, just give myself a line as to where the center is. Okay. And I'm going to start to turn into it just a little bit. Now, I'm just using the half-inch spindle gouge. So you start with the flute and the bevel's just touching, and you roll the tool into the cut. Okay? Now, I'm going to use my skew come in on an angle cut. What you want to do when you come in on that cut is make sure that this side of the bevel is pointing exactly in the direction of the cut you want. So on this side, I want the cut going in this way. And that can be a rough cut, so hold on tight. Okay, now I can refine my spear a little more. And you have to look at the top of the spear in order to see the shape that you're forming. So I can see that on this I need to come in here. Okay. So you can see that it's come along quite well. What I'm going to do now is change back and do a little more, refine the bat a little more, and then I'll come back and work on this joint between the sphere and the bat. I've gone back to the center for the bat, and before I turn I want to spin it a little bit and just make sure that I've got everything where I want it to be, and that it's clear of the tool rest. Now I want to take off a little bit here. And as I'm going, I'm checking because I don't want to go too low. That's one thing I like about this tool. You can angle it just like a skew and actually make a cut like a skew. Okay, you can see where it's come in now a little bit on the sphere, but that's okay. I'm going to take this down a little further because I've got to get the bat to round. Okay, so I'll start out here. Okay, not quite. Okay, just a little bit more. Okay, that's not round. Now, someone may ask, well, why don't you finish the bat all the way up to here? If I were to do that, what I would end up with is this very narrow area down here. And I want a little more stability down there since I'm turning all this just between centers. Okay? Okay, now on the other side of the sphere. Now, obviously I'm turning with a green piece of wood. Normally I turn these bats with only with dry hardwood. However, dry hardwood this thickness was not available for this demo. These bats turn really nicely out of poplar, maple, Okay, so having defined that part, I'm going to go back now to the center for the sphere and try and turn it into the back. Okay, this part is probably the hardest part you have to cut. Okay, that I'll clean up a little later. Still a little more to go on both sides. Now let's see. I'm going to try my bowl gouge and see if I can get a nice clean cut coming in. And I'm going to try my bowl gouge, see. I want to make sure this bevel is pointing in on an angle. Get a tight grip. Okay, refine it with my screw. Okay. I turn the tool to engage the cut. Okay, one more cut with my bowl gouge. Well, actually, this is a fairly clean joint. I'm not too worried about the fact that this is not rounded all the way in yet. I can make a couple cuts and try and correct that. Okay. Recently I had to make 2 of these bats, and both of them were going to be used as gifts for Little League coaches. Now that's kind of a messed up cut there, but it's really hard to try and come straight in. I will try it with a banana and see if I can't get in that little cut right there. So I know where to go in. I'm just going to make a pencil line here so I have a better idea. I have a feeling that's just going to have to be sanded out in there. If you've never used a Badan, they work really well because they're half of a skew, so they can get into slightly tighter corners. I'll try again with the skew. Okay. So there's not much of the ball holding on here, so we want to go over to this part. Whoa! It's not the way to make this sneak up. Kind of hard to pick which tool is going to get into that area the best. Okay, this area I think I can take off when I go back to the bat. I just want to round this a little more. Actually, find when you turn yours, dry wood turns easier than this does. Okay, one more cup with the scoop and try and keep it where it's supposed to be. Okay, I think that would be okay. At this point, maybe a smaller finger down. Okay, at this point, any sanding you want to do on the ball, you would do it this time. This little mark I wouldn't worry about whatsoever. You can sand that out later. Okay. The hardest thing is to make this cut in here, so we may have to come back to this angle again later. Alright, so I'm going to change it out now back to the bat. Actually, I thought this maple was a little harder than it is, and it appears to be a fairly soft maple. So it's not cutting quite as clean as I'd like. Okay. Alright, I think I can live with this. I mean, it's just going to take some sanding to fix up these areas in here, so I can go ahead and take this part off now. Now you can use the spindle roughing gouge if you wanted for this part. Now what I'm looking at is the top here. Give me an idea if I'm fairly straight.
So Ruby, I have a question. Can you pause it?
You see where I'm cutting in here, but I'm not
Oh,
cutting here. Yes,
I
go
think you
ahead.
I think you're just about ready to answer my question. Is it offset now because it's green and it's warped or something? Because you had that round and now it's not round anymore.
Yeah, what happened was I didn't realize this piece of wood was as wet as it was or as soft as it was. And what happened was when you go in and take out the ball, where the ball meets the bat, it becomes extremely flexible because it's so thin in that area.
Okay. So
So that was why I say use a dry piece of wood and a good hardwood.
yeah. So
Yeah,
right,
I encountered problems with this one that I've never encountered when I've done other bats.
because I was wondering, that was my next question. Or if you crank down your tailstock too much right now, is it going to warp that more because there's not much holding that together, right?
Absolutely. The
Okay.
last thing you want to do is push your drive center in further.
Okay. Any
Okay?
other questions right now while we're stopped?
Yeah, I was curious. Why is it that you prefer the ball a little bit lopsided?
Um, if the ball were passing through the bat, there would be some distortion to the ball, and it looks more realistic if the ball is not a perfect sphere.
Okay.
I mean, think about it. You're squeezing the ball into the bat. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Got it.
Would you suggest using a steady rest maybe if it was green wood like this?
You could try. Um, I have done them in the past with the steady rest, and I found it really got in the way more than anything. But that would be an option. My suggestion is try different things and see what works for you. Any other questions? Okay, if there aren't, I'll continue. That's because the wood itself is moved, okay? A lot of that I can sand in later. But what I want to look at is the transition from here coming into here. So this, I don't want to come in too much there. I wonder if I let this out a little bit, if that'll help. Okay, that's where you see I actually release tension on the tailstock so that the compression is not helping it to warp.
Yeah, you can actually see it move.
Still there. All right, so there's some discrepancy here that I can sand out. Okay, so I'll worry about coming down here and shaping the rest of the back. Okay, so the end of the bat has a bead basically here that comes into kind of a cove. So we need to form the bead, leave room to cut it off, and transition it into the side of the bat. I'm going to use the beading parting tool. So when you use the beading parting tool, start with it flat up, and then you just basically roll it into the cut. You have to be careful if you don't go too far. And you also have 4 other edges, so if I want to use one of those edges, pick one that's sharp, and do a scraping cut with it, you can. Okay. But I find this will give you, you can get yourself some very nice round beads with it. Now you can use the skew. If you want, this entire part you can do with the roughing tool. You want to come above the wood and down on the bevel. And as soon as it starts to cut, you come into it. Okay, I'll just quickly show you what causes a catch with a skew. When you're working with the skew, I'm going to turn this down to real slow speed. That's a little slow. So you rest it on the tool rest, you let the bevel rub, you slowly bring it up, and as soon as it starts to cut, you just continue the cut. Now, where people get screwed up is instead of just continuing when it starts to cut, okay, so here you can see it's just cutting, okay, they get greedy and they lift the tool up on its edge and they come off the bevel and you can see for yourself what it's doing. So there's a fine line, I'll do it at regular speed, not the catch part, preferably, as to how far you let it cut. So it's not cutting, it starts to cut, and I keep it at that point on my tool rest, coming down. If I try to take a deeper cut, I'm going to screw myself up. If I want to come down here more, start at this end, and each time you come back a little further, and then you create your taper. See, it's almost like working with plastic. Okay. Blend these two in a little bit. Okay. Okay. Now, normally I get it a lot smoother than that coming along here. Part of it is because the wood is moving so much, but we'll try and take this out. I think I'll use this. Okay. Now I'm not going to worry about that part. I can hand sand that off. Now normally what I would be doing is I would be hand sanding the entire bat. Okay. Okay, so we'll take this down just a hair further. So there you have it. Like I said, these will clean up. So basically, there you have your bat halfway through your ball.
You have your ball halfway through the bat.
Halfway through.
Do you want to say that again?
All right. Okay, so basically, there you have your ball halfway through your bat. A minute ago, I said it wrong. We had to retake this part.
It's going in.
However, well, okay, so you get the basic idea of how it's turned off center. If you worked with a really hard, dry piece of wood, you wouldn't have quite the problem that I had with it bending and going off center. Once you get the ball part done, then you would do all of the hand sanding. Then when you go back to the bat, at this point, that's when you would sand all of this. Most of this I'll leave and I'll sand it later. To clean up these little cuts in here, Generally, it's pretty hard not to get some movement. So what I do is I go in later with a file and sandpaper, and you can sand those little ridges right out and blend them right in. Now, somebody once asked me, well, aren't you going to put any finish on it? At this point, no, I wouldn't. And the reason is that the ball itself, I paint white. Okay, so here you have it. And if I put finish on it, I don't want to get any finish on the ball because then the paint won't take to it really well. And the other thing is I want to make sure I get finish in here. Okay, and if I have the finish in here, then when I'm painting the bat, if I screw up and I get some paint over here, I can wipe it off with a damp cloth or a wet brush quite easily. Okay? Now, when you go to make the lines for the stitching on the ball, those actually form a circle. Okay, I use a circle template, and you can kind of guesstimate which of these will work. And just draw on half of a circle here, turn the bat 180 degrees, use the same circle, put the template back on, draw half a circle there, and you can see these two areas here. Just bring them down so that you have a circle continues here. And the same thing, basically, I didn't quite center that real well. If you have an indexing position on your lathe, that makes it even easier. Okay, so you get the idea of how to draw the lines on. And then from there, it's just with red paint, make little V's all the way along. And you just continue in that direction until it comes back and it meets here. Okay, and that's basically all there is to it. Okay, to take this off the lathe, what I would do is take it over to a bandsaw, and I have a V-block cut, and I lay it in the V-block, and I would just nip off the two ends square. Most of the baseball bats and that I've looked at, they're all square there anyway. Now the water just from the force of turning is starting to come outward on this, so it's going to be a little while before this is dry enough that I could finish sanding it and paint it. However, it gives you the idea of what to do and what kind of problems you can run into. Don't use wet wood. This was the first time I ever tried it with wet wood, so I definitely won't be using it in the future. Okay, once you've mastered making these, and you've got the idea of turning on two axes, and you have a much bigger lathe, otherwise you'll have to scale it down, you can then go to this bat, my worm bat. And just like the other bat, this one is turned on two axes. One axis goes along the handle of the bat out this way. The second axis goes through the top half of the bat. Leave kind of a bulky area here in the center. And then what you do basically is you carve these areas.
That would be a pretty hefty chunk of wood to start with,
You'll
doesn't it?
have little pieces coming out here where you mount your centers.
Wow.
All right? So it just gives you another challenge, another direction to look in. Okay? If you have any questions, I'm live during this session, and I'll be more than happy to answer them for you. And thank you for inviting me and watching the demo. I hope you learned something.
Nice job.
I really honestly did not expect the problems that I encountered with the wet wood, and for it to move that much on me. That other bat that I did, what I did first was I drew it out on paper like this, and then from there I could measure it and figure out, okay, what size piece of wood I had. The diameter or the thickness of the wood still only had to be the thickness of the widest part of the bat. And then all I had to do was make sure I had a wide enough board that I could put this on. And I band sawed out the rough shape first before I turned it. So, any questions?
I think somebody wanted to know the length of the bat and the diameter of the dimensions of your project there.
Okay, got a ruler right here. Uh, you can scale these to any size that fits you. The bat itself at its widest part was 2.5 inches. There's 12 plus 8.5. So it was 20.5 inches.
Okay. And your blank was wider than the 2.5 because of you had the room for the offset. So it was probably what did you say 2 3/4 or 3 inches diameter at the
Yeah,
widest?
I think I used a 3.5 inch wide board.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So if you couldn't find a blank that big, would it be okay to glue up? That would hold up if you glued up a piece to make it.
You probably could,
Okay.
but I would be very leery about doing that, to be honest with you.
Okay.
You want to make sure you're using a very good glue, something like a tight bond. Um, don't be cheap on the glue. Make sure you get a lot of glue, that when you clamp it together, you squash all the glue coming out, so that, and give it enough time to dry so the bond is a really good bond.
Okay.
Yeah, I would think you would not want the glue joint to run through the point where the ball and the bat meet.
Yeah, that would make a weak area.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very nice.
Has the bat warped since the start because it's green? Actually, no, it hasn't. Surprisingly enough, that was the actual bat right there, and well, no, it didn't.
About what RPMs do you turn that at, Rudy? Just enough to keep it from shaking, vibrating?
Um, my general turning, and I do this with everything, is I turn the lathe up. When the lathe starts to vibrate, then I back the speed down. I find that speed is actually your friend. Turning slow can be very difficult.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And I see there's
The amount of the offset from the center of the bat to the center of the ball was probably 1.25 inches. So down at the top end, if I measure it, probably 0.75 inches. So when you set the point at this end, you would only move it about 0.75 inches over. And if you've drawn this out on paper first, then you already know exactly how far to offset it. My suggestion is if you look at the two bats, Well, I guess they're about the same in their offset through the ball. I would go more with this one where you don't offset it too much through the bat, and you'll have more success with it. But draw it out on paper first or right onto the wood, take a look at it, and you'll have a really good idea of exactly what you're going to get when you're done. Any other questions?
Rudy,
Did
what's the diameter of the ball roughly?
The diameter of the ball ends up whatever diameter you chose for the bat.
Okay.
Okay.
And that's because of the thickness of the wood.
Correct.
Yeah.
I just had a comment, when you were having difficulty with those cuts where the ball joins the bat, do you think that was mainly because it was wet wood? Or you always,
Absolutely, because when I made
Okay.
this bat, my last cuts are my finishing cuts on both of them. And I had no trouble with this whatsoever, or on the other bats that I've made. This is the
Okay.
first bat I've ever done that really had the problem, and that was why we discussed whether to refilm the whole thing using some dry wood when I got a hold of some, or to leave it so you could see what kind of problems will come up using a wood that's not really an appropriate wood. And we decided you're better off to see what problems come up and how to deal with it.
I agree.
How many of these bats have I made? Probably about a dozen now. They're very popular with people that are into the little leagues and that.
Do the people you give these to understand how difficult it was for you to make them?
I doubt it.
Yeah.
I highly doubt it. I have one.
I think unless you're a wood turner, you would not appreciate the value of that.
This is a ball that I made, a sphere, a ball, and I had it at a wood show. And this older gentleman came up to look at it, picked it up, really liked it. And I said, if you want it, take it, it's yours. And his buddy beside him said, you better get him to sign the other one. So he signed the other one, and it was signed by Fergie Jenkins. He had aged quite a bit since I had seen him play ball, and I didn't recognize him. But apparently, he was in town for the one of the museums in Amherstburg had done a whole display on him for the Black History Month. And what I had done when I made the ball was I got a real softball or a real hard ball. I measured the diameter and made my sphere the same size. And basically, when I did this one, I took the other ball apart and I laid the leather on top of here in order to trace the pattern and where all the stitching was. And he picked it up in his hand and he says, that feels exactly like a real one. So that was kind of a compliment.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Hey, Doug, can you highlight me for a second?
Yep. You're on.
I've got about half a dozen of these things. I
Perfect.
think it would make good bats. I will get the measurements on these and donate these to the club for the supply thing if anybody's interested.
So they're a
Okay.
good 2 inches thick.
What's that?
They're a
Yeah,
good.
it's 2.5 thick,
That's perfect.
7 inches, a little more than 7 inches wide, and 30 inches long. And I've got several of these. Could I cut the 7-inch one down in half and give you what would that be, 3 3 3/4, or would that
What
be
I
enough?
would do is make a center line down the board to be the axis for the bat. Draw your bat to the size that you want. Make sure you leave the ends a little thicker so you know where you're going to cut it off and for moving your center. Then take and draw a sphere on it. And, if you have one of those circle templates, it's really good. Draw the sphere partway through the bat, and then draw the axis through the center of the sphere down to the end of the bat. And once you've got it drawn out, the rest of it is turn it in the stages that I showed you.
Yeah. Could this piece be turned into two pieces? I mean, this is a little over 7 inches. So you would have what, 3 3/4 by 2.5? Would that be adequate?
Yeah,
If I get 2 out of that,
yeah, that piece is probably a little long for what those bats will be.
yeah. Okay.
I mean, on these two bats, you can see I made them both different sizes. So you can take whatever wood you have and make them to size that you want.
Okay. Right.
Okay, like the ones that I did, the smaller ones are the ones that end up being used as gifts for the Little League coaches and stuff like that.
What kind of wood is that, Steve?
I think it's in the oak family.
Yeah, it looks like oak.
As I thought, looks like oak. So do
Hey,
you want?
Steve? Oh, go ahead, Doug.
I can say you want to put them in the store, them, and people can buy one if they want to try to make
sure.
one.
Yeah.
What do
Buy
we-
or donate, I don't care either way, but yeah.
We just put like a $5 price tag on it. What do you think?
Yeah, that'll work.
If you want to cut them and tell me how many you got, and I'll add it to our store. And if people want to buy them, because this obviously is going to be our challenge next month,
Right.
either bat with the ball or just make a bat. I don't care what level you're at, and that'll be the president's challenge next month. Okay?
Well, maybe also have them just make a ball.
Oh yeah, just turn the ball. What'd you paint your stitching on the ball? A marker, or actually painted it?
Yeah, well, let's see. Paint the ball with a white acrylic paint is probably the best way to go. And then the stitching, you can use a red marker if you want. The very thin markers.
Yep.
More like a pen. Now, the one that I made and sent away for the two coaches, the guy sent me a photograph of what he did with it. So what he did was he cut out a baseball runner out of a board. Then he mounted the bat on it, and this is placed on the wall. And apparently there's a little plaque beside it that goes for the coach. So that's how that was why he contacted me and wanted me to make the bats for him.
Wait.
First thought it looked like a chalk outline, maybe it was the murder weapon.
Yeah, no, it's a cutout of on a board, and the black line is the shadow you're seeing against the wall. So it just gives you another avenue to go into. My philosophy has always been that you know, like somebody says, well, you know how to do everything. And I say to them, no, I don't. You never, ever stop learning, and you never let your head get like this, because I don't care how good you are. There is someone else out there who's going to be a whole lot better at doing what you do. Like if you think you're a really good spindle turner, I mean, like I wouldn't even want to count how many hundreds of ballisters and newel posts I've done. All you have to do is watch Steve Jones on the internet and some of his videos of him turning. I mean, he's a spindle turner since he was a child, and the ease that he uses, the skew and the speed he can turn at is, I mean, he's like a magician. I would defy a machine to even come close to what he can do.
Yep. Well, we thank you, Ruby, a lot for your demonstration. It was wonderful.
Yeah,
you know,
great. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm anxious to try one. So
Yeah, they are not as difficult as it looked in the video if you're using dry wood.
okay.
And the main reason we didn't reshoot it was that I figured you might as well find out what happens when you pick an inappropriate piece of wood.
Okay.
Good enough.
Cool.
Okay?
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you for asking me to demo.
Yeah, you're really welcome. We're really privileged to have you. So
Ruby, I got a question for you.
Sure.
When you're turning that off center like that, do you extend the pins out further on your drive and your live center so that the pins are deeper in the wood? You don't.
No. The drive center that I use is like a steb center, so it has a lot of little points going in.
Yeah.
And what I did was I bought a live or the dead center in the headstock is like a steb center, and the one that I have in the tailstock has the same profile. It's got a sharp point with a lot of little points around it.
Mhm.
And I picked that up from Axminster Tools in the UK, and I find it's excellent. If you want, I can run downstairs and grab it and show you.
Not for me, you don't need to.
Okay.
But I was just curious because you have the centrifugal force of that being off center if you had your pins in deeper in the wood to hold it.
okay.
I've seen some people actually on the tailstock end make a tenon and put it into a chuck. But you have to loosen it in the chuck as well every time that you move it off center.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I think this concludes this meeting. And I'll leave the room open and we can talk and ask questions. And but at this point, I'm going to